Yeah, so today is the second Future of Coaching webinar. In general, this particular webinar, we have talked about things about technology, neuroscience, quantum science, spirituality, whatever. But generally things which are not part of the core curriculum or the framework of coaching as is laid down by ICF or other accreditation agencies such as the MCC. Those are handled on the fourth Wednesday every month by Cindy. And in between, we have a colloquium, which is about dialogue. So this is really, in a sense, looking ahead, if we could, in terms of what we think would be the trends. Today, it's not quite that, but it's an area which we believe is extremely relevant and critical to coaching, which is about assessment techniques that we use synchronous with coaching for various purposes in terms of evaluating the personality or whatever the total holistic presentation of a person who's being coached, so that the coach can have a better idea how to approach them, to be able to make them more aware, present it to them, psychometrics and various other kinds of devices. And also during the progression of the coaching journey, to be able to evaluate what the shifts are. Some of these, of course, are pretty expensive, and therefore they might just usually be used for companies, by companies for their sort of selection of people who need to be coached at leadership positions to figure out what are the areas in which they might require coaching. There are techniques and ways to approach that. Some of them about team in terms of 360 viewpoints about the person. Some of them are more about personalities from a psychological point of view. In addition to presenting you with the variety of options that a person has, a coach should at least be familiar with, if not necessarily be absolutely capable of handling it or certified in it. At least if a company asks, okay, do you know what Hogan is or Harrison is or Belbin is or whatever, Barrett is or whatever, you would be able to intelligently say, yes, I know what it is. It may or may not be certified, but you might have some idea about how to use that. So today, Suman is going to cover, it's a very vast subject. So in about an hour, maybe we can spill over a little bit of time if you guys are willing to stay on. She would cover various aspects of it, present you with some free online resources as well, which can be used for assessment. And if there is sufficient interest and if you people get back to us and say, hey, this is an area that we would like to know more about, we could always organize additional sessions. And in a later point in time, we are also planning to have separate programs which could qualify for ACTP under the banner of assessments, which are in sync with the coach competencies. So without any further say, Suman, welcome to this program. And so if you could just, Suman, by the way, she's a TCC coach and currently she's in mentoring and training with us, just completed the program to become an MCC very shortly. She would be an MCC, I'm hoping in the next month or so. And she has been in the coaching business for quite a long time. As far as I know, she also heads the APAC, or used to head, I'm not quite sure in what position, the president of that coaching organization. She's pretty active in the coaching space. So Suman, if you could just briefly introduce yourself and start on your presentation. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Ram. You're able to hear me okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. So, as always, delighted to be part of the offering from Kucharya. Very happy to be here. Many of you I have known you personally as well. So, welcome everyone. This is a very exciting subject for me because this is one of my biggest tools that I ensure that I use in all my work. So, introduction, Ram has said most of who I am. I live in Mumbai and I have spent close to 30 years working with people, human resources, being an entrepreneur and coach and consultant and leadership educator, all of that. Um, I also did my PhD, and I need to mention here for my PhD, I used two psychometric tools. So That's how much I relate to psychometrics. And I will try and share with you my understanding on some of these tools. And some of these assessments tools I personally use quite a bit, and some of them I'm aware of. So I'm bringing everything here. And whatever questions you would have, please feel free to put it up in the chat box. And as and when, in the process of sharing with you the ideas, I will respond to some of them. So let's quickly look at what are psychometric tools. They are assessments, they are tests which essentially helps us to evaluate why the word itself seems a little judgmental, opinionated, but this I think the word is appropriate to say that it gives us an understanding of the person who we're going to be working with. And very simply, many of you would also relate to this. you know any kind of physical fitness that we want to get into. Many of the fitness consultants encourage us to get a complete body profile done. They say get all your blood tests done and all the vitals checked and everything else. So similarly, from my perspective, any of the psychometric tools that you use, the reports that you're able to sort of make that part of the conversation with your coachee client. um, the acceptance of the conversation becomes that much easier for the coachee, because remember, the reports are generated based on their assessment of themselves. It's not that somebody else is telling them who they are, but it's sort of them taking a peek into who they are through these reports. So it can be very, very powerful resources that we could use in the conversation. And they use, many of them are familiar with many of these tools if you're especially working with the corporates and various other organizations. And these tests usually also include personality profiles, there could be reasoning tests, there could be questionnaires that others would have built, or you can build questionnaires depending on what you wish to understand about your coachee, etc. So this is like almost entering into understanding the psychometric test. And a good test, when you have to pick up a good test, um, three things I would encourage you to do. Look at the standardization. So, standardization is more to do with how many people have been administered a particular test or a tool. All the well-known tests today are, really been administered to many thousands of people. So, if you're picking up any of the well-known ones like the Hogan or the MBTI, etc., you don't have to really be very worried about the standardization, reliability, and validity. But if there's anything else, sometimes I particularly remember there is one tool which I will be talking about in a little while, which is also sort of developed further by our own Dr. Uday Parikh when he was still amongst us. And that test is called locus of control. So some of my clients, when I use locus of control, they ask me, so is this an established test? Do you have the reliability, validity, etc.? So what exists there is what he had done in terms of the research. So it is still possible for you to check these measures. This will build credibility to the psychometric test that you are using. Okay. The area of focus today, there are plenty of tools available, plenty of tools. But I'm trying to sort of um, share with you those which I personally have seen being used extensively in our work, that is coaching. So I'm sort of putting it into like four buckets. And so first one, we'll talk a little bit about personality assessment tools. And MBTI has been around for a very, very long time. Enneagram, of course, has been there for long. Locus of control I just mentioned to you, and then we'll go to the other focus areas as well. So just one mention here is, We're talking about personality and behavior. The way these tools essentially provide inputs is, when you look at personality, it is a lot deeper. It's about the preferences, it's about the choices that we make. And when you look at the behavioral assessment tools, it essentially talks about the manifestation of our personality. So between these two, also as what I have understood and worked with, the behavioral assessment tools is easy for us to say pre and post. So if you're running a 6 months or a 9 months coaching intervention, you could do a FIRO B pre and post, because any of the behavioral assessment tools, it's also easy to see the shifts because it's behavioral, it is external. Whereas when it comes to personality assessment tools, especially something like an MBTI and Enneagram, it's a lot more deeper. So it might not necessarily help to repeat an MBTI or Enneagram, because your personality does not necessarily change so much as the behavior does. So I just thought I'll leave that thought with you. Let's start off with the Myers-Briggs type indicator. And what I've done is I'm just going to very, very briefly and quickly share with you two or three things. One is, what is the construct of that particular tool, and also, maybe wherever possible, an example of how it can be used. So Myers-Briggs type indicator is one of the most familiar, most used tools across various developmental initiatives. And they provide an introspective self report. So there's a questionnaire that your participants can take, your coachee can take, and the reports get generated. And in India, um, people like me, we always go to one organization, which is Anahat, to generate MBTI reports. And it's always best to go to them because it's a very established standard, validity, reliability, all established kind of a report that they provide. And they have multiple options. They have for individuals, they have for functional teams, they have organizational report. Depending on what issues your coachee wants to work with you, you could possibly also select what report would be useful. So, what the test actually helps us to understand is the four categories of the personality. So, your coachee could be operating either as an introvert or an extrovert. And what this essentially means is, he or she draws a lot of, energy from within. So the introversion person is quite capable to do the reflection, introspection, and if that's required, journal writing and all of that is required as part of the coaching engagement. An introverted person relatively feels more comfortable to sit and think and reflect, etc. A person whose extroversion um, tends to draw energy from the others, so they like to have conversations, meet more people. So if in the coaching conversation, if suppose there's an opportunity for them to go and talk to 5 people and ask those 5 people some feedback about themselves, the extroversion people will be like gung-ho to do something like that. So these are also useful for us as coaches to understand what kind of developmental opportunities we can create during the coaching conversations. There could be some who are the sensing type and some the intuition type. One of the things about the MBTI is these words are not necessarily the dictionary meaning words. So the way it is defined here is a little different. So I invite you to please look at it differently. The people who are the sensing type are very comfortable with a lot of data. They have very good eye for detail. If you want them to read a book, they will be very comfortable to read a book. And if just like in 2 weeks, they can read a book and come back to you, because they have a flair for assimilating a lot of data. The intuition people are the big picture people. If you ask them to read a book, it it may not be their what do I say, preference to read a book. So the intuition people are the ones who would like to watch like a TED talk or watch a video to understand something about themselves or a concept or whatever else. So as a coach, if you understand this, once again, you can place their development accordingly. um, this is also very useful if you're working with leaders, if you're coaching business leaders in any organization. There could be someone who comes to you with a matter to discuss, which will be around, I'm expected to look at the big picture in the organization, and that's the area I want to be coached on. And if you have an MBTI report, it will tell you if they're sensing type, then the direction that the conversation need to take will be a little different. So that's the sensing and intuition. And there could be some who are thinking type or the feeling type. The thinking type person is very objective, to the point, straightforward, will call a spade a spade. So you will have a coachee sometimes who will tell you directly, today's conversation was not as good as the last conversation or something like that. They are very open, and they also are very they're very comfortable to share their stories, which could have very deep meaning for them. So that's the thinking type, because they look at the objective and accordingly they will share. The feeling type people are a little more sensitive, and they tend to sort of be concerned about, can I say this, how will this come across, what will people think about me, etc. So the thinking and feeling again has an impact on the way the person will associate themselves with the learning, etc. Then we have the judging and the perceiving type. The judging type person um, is very planned. They are the ones who can actually look at a vision and work towards a vision, and they can create your midterm plan, long-term plan, etc. The perceiving types are in the moment kind of people. So if suppose you're working on you're using a grow model in coaching, and you want to talk about the goal, and if you ask them, so what is it in 5 years that you expect that to happen with yourself, the judging people, you will notice, are better equipped to respond to that question than the perceiving people. So for coaches, this gives you an indicator about, what is it that the person is really looking for. So obviously, at this point of time, I also want to mention, as coaches, we cannot impose any tools to anybody. We cannot say to them, you should do MBTI or you should do any other tool. um, but it's always good. So one of my practices is I give them like a battery of information about battery of tools, and I say, sometimes I even take a session on what are each of these tools help us to understand, and they choose which tool that they want to work with. They meaning the coachee as well as the sponsor from the organization. Okay? So MBTI provides us almost 16 different types of information about individuals, and the more you dig deeper, the more you will understand this particular tool. This is a paid tool, and I think today. Um, I think this year they've revised the fees again, and also you need a certification to be able to get the report. This is about MBTI.
Suman,
Yeah,
may I just stop you for a minute?
yeah.
There's a question Abigail had asked when you talked about control tests. Are you recommending them, or are you not recommending them? Because it wasn't clear to her when you spoke about
Locus of
validity.
control. Locus.
Yeah,
Yeah,
correct.
I recommend. I recommend because we have information about the standardization, reliability, and validity, because Dr. Uday Pari has researched a lot, but it is not like an international tool like an MBTI where many people across the world use it. So that difference is there, but your conviction to use a tool is very, very necessary.
Yeah.
So I do recommend Locus of control.
Okay. And MBTI, yeah, of course, MBTI is offered by many people who are the licensees and so on. But basically, I just would like to point out, MBTI is just a derivative of Jungian
Yeah.
uh, personality theory, whatever. And pretty much derived from there. And there are quite a lot of online tests, which I would personally think are just about as accurate in terms of the purpose for which you would like to use it. But one has to be extremely careful about how one interprets. There are many companies who go about making people wear the 4 letters as some kind of badge of honor, which is the most stupid thing that you can do, because there is no good or bad profile. Each one has its own positives, each one has its own negatives. So many of these things, it's not so much about the tests and theirs, but in terms of the false belief systems that are woven around this, and saying, somebody asked me a question, what do you recommend as a coach profile? I've given my personal opinion that an NFP would be more a coach-like person, because the person is intuitive, the person is feeling, and the person is non-judgmental. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's only profile that will work. There could be multiple other factors which come into being. And also being somewhere in the center line of all this, I generally find in my experience works far better than anyone who is on the extreme of any of these patterns. Yeah, sorry, Suman. Is there anything else? Yeah.
No, just one more point. I totally agree with what you're saying, Ram. And also I think as coaches, for us, whatever type we are, our journey is also to pick up the elements of the other type which is useful for us, right? I mean, for us, it's our presence essentially. So great point that we cannot bucket anybody in a particular type and say this is how the person is in any of the tools, because always please note, any of the tools, there is a plus or minus 2 variation that is always possible. So you just use it as an indicator. And someone had asked you a question, Ram, whether you recommend an assessment before the first session or something like that. I think Abhimanyu had asked.
Yeah, no, Alexander, but I've
Yeah.
answered yes, which is what I do.
Yes.
But sometimes if they can't provide it in the first one, especially in executive coaching, it takes time. I would start with them and then try and get it. There's no point in waiting too long before you get an assessment, because if you are going to use assessment at all, it's very good that you start in the beginning. And assessment is not about what the coach understands of the client. It's about what the client understands about himself or herself by going through explanation of that assessment. That's really the part that many coaches miss. It is like, for example, a Hogan. It's almost like, to me, a horoscope when I read that. But I'm not going to pretend to be an astrologer or a crystal ball gazer to be able to tell the client this is what you are, which is stupid in terms of, which then links back to Abhimanyu said, yes, all profiles are okay. But the point is, a coach has to be not knowing, and the coach has to be far more emotionally intelligent. And therefore, if I were to choose between a J and a P, and N and thinking or a feeling F and a T, I would prefer being a F and a P, which would be more in terms of coaching competencies, than a person who's cognitive and a person who is judging. So yes, certain profiles do work better with certain things. I mean, these are all personal opinions. We can keep talking about them till the cows come home. We won't get anywhere. Anyway,
yeah. Okay, so should I just go ahead then?
Yeah, please.
Okay. The next tool that I want to talk about is Enneagram, which is again another personality tool. Ram, you need to really hold me back on this on time.
Yeah, so you have exactly 3 minutes, Suman. Don't go any further than that, because you're halfway in time. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So Enneagram is a system for personality development. Very, very old system. So people can take a test, and there are many, many, many tests available on Enneagram, and it sort of helps us to understand essentially our personality type more from how do I respond to the external stimulus. So we have developed habitual response patterns to the external stimulus, and the habitual response is what is our personality type. So it's quite profound as a system, and at least in my experience, many people who have worked with Enneagram have found that they can really, really go very deep if they wish to using this particular system. And a lot of organizations are now becoming aware and wanting to use Enneagram as part of the coaching engagements. Moving ahead, I want to talk about the locus of control. I mentioned this, I think, 2 or 3 times. And there's a reason I've mentioned it so many times, because this is one of the tools which is freely available. You don't need really a certification on locus of control. And the test is available. Any of you who can access, there are many other tests on locus of control internationally, but in India, you can just pick up Dr. Uday Parikh TV Rao's psychometric assessments book, and you will get the test there, along with the scale and everything else. So locus of control is also, it can be very powerful. This is one of the tools I had used for my PhD research as well. So what this talks about is, am I internally focused and externally focused? And when it comes to the external focus, it also measures two things. One is, am I externally focused to sort of put all my issues on people? It's almost like, do I get into blaming people, or do I blame circumstances and luck? So when you're working with this, during the conversations, the coaches are themselves able to see where is their focus and how it is not helping them to overtly depend on other people for their success. I'm not talking about effective teamwork and all that is very necessary, but blaming others for what they are not able to get. So locus of control helps in both these measures. Interestingly, you could have a coachee whose internal locus of control can be extremely high. And the challenges they will face is they're not able to delegate effectively, they're not able to do effective conversations with the teams, and many other things. So how locus of control report can be used is, and this report is just like a one pager, because you just get 3 scores. So it's also very easy for the coachee to relate to. And so how you use it is, at least this is what I do. I leave the scores with them if they have chosen to work with locus of control. And as they're speaking, I tend to ask them, so where do you think this particular thing that you mentioned just now sits on these numbers? So they're able to see, how to work with this. Very powerful, very, very simple. So this is locus of control. Um, let's move on to the next set, which are behavioral testing tools. Many of you would be familiar with FIRO-B. And FIRO-B again is used by many organizations. They're very familiar with FIRO-B as a tool. I have worked with organizations where they have even changed the language of the questionnaire, and that also has been validated and all of that. So they're very familiar. So it will be easy for you to recommend FIRO-B, especially in many of the government and public sector organizations in India. So what FIRO-B stands for is fundamental interpersonal relationship orientation. How do I fundamentally orient myself, with the others in relationships through my behavior? So here I'm only presenting the behavior test. There is also another test called the feeling test, where a lot of counselors tend to use the FIRO-F. FIRO-B is used a lot in coaching and training and facilitation and all of that. So Dr. William Schutz, who initially put together this test, he said that every human being has 3 basic relationship needs. The first one is the need for significance. The second is the need for competence. And the third is the need to be liked. And he said, irrespective of who you are, you will have these 3 in various measures. So the FIRO-B was built around these 3 basic needs, relationship needs. And what it measures is that in every relationship, I am expressing a behavior, and also I am wanting a behavior from the other person. So it measures these two elements. And the 3 areas also that it measures is First one is inclusion, which is built on the importance, significance. So it measures, for example, if this is my report, it measures how much do I include people into what I do. So expressed inclusion will be how much do I show people that they're important to me? How much do I ensure that I am inviting and seeking their participation? All of that is inclusion. And it's also about my ability to build rapport with people. The expressed control is about how much do I take charge in any given situation? How assertive am I? How good am I in providing a direction to my team? All of that falls under expressed control. The expressed affection is how much do I show to others that I care? How much do I appreciate people? How much do I allow people into my space? All of that is my expressed behaviors. My wanted behaviors is the same thing. How much do I want to be included into others' activities? And how much control do I want on myself from others? And how much affection do I seek from others? And the scores that you get in each of these, cells or boxes actually sort of defines my need for relationships and how do I interact with people, etc. So FIRO-B works on just three basic principles. Even if you don't have a certification on FIRO-B, you can still use this tool. Anahat actually provides a certification on FIRO-B if anybody is interested. So just three principles. Principle number one, if I am in a supervisory role, I'm a manager, I'm holding any other designation, but in a leadership kind of a situation, my expressed scores has to be relatively higher than the wanted scores. It's just a principle. If it is not so, that's the opportunity for me to look at why am I not including people into my work, or why am I not taking control, etc. Okay? So first principle, express scores are relatively higher than the wanted scores. Principle number two, the scores range between 0 and 9. So if I have a 0, does not mean I'm not good at building relationships. It just means my orientation towards relationships is much lower than someone with a 6 or a 9 kind of a score. So that also indicates something, and a person can actually explore and find out, how is that showing up at work. And the third principle of FIRO-B is the difference between any two cells. If it is greater than 3, I am doing something more than appropriate and more than necessary. So when I use this in my coaching conversations, if my coachee is willing to work with FIRO-B, I share with them these three principles. And I have seen that they are very comfortable using FIRO-B tool because it gives numbers. And for a lot of them, numbers speak a lot. And also I've seen, if one of the coaching requirements that the coachee wants to work with, let's say she comes and tells me, Suman, I feel a lot of times that I'm not assertive enough. I don't call out when, things matter, etc. I ask them to look at the expressed control score. And in my experience, and I have done thousands of FIRO-B testing, in my experience, the expressed control score for a person who says my assertiveness is very low tends to be much lower. So they can relate to this easily, and it's very, how do I say, very easy for us as coaches to work with and for the coachee to understand. So this is FIRO-B. And again, you will get the reports from any of the known, Anahat will give you the report, and we have also developed a report. So it's quite possible for you to get the reports around this. Can I go ahead, Ram? Is there any question from anybody on FIRO-B?
Yeah, not specifically on FIRO-B, Suman. There were some questions. For example, this you might like to answer. Someone with a J profile as compared to a P profile face any challenges in terms of being in the moment and in the present as part of a coaching conversation?
It's interesting that all of us will have some element of what do I need to do to be present? All of us have this question. And if I'm a J, it is indicative that I'm so much present in my head, planning, thinking, analyzing, uh, being logic, etc. It just takes a little longer for me to get into my space. It's possible. It's definitely possible, but it's the mindfulness practice.
Yeah, and one thing that I would like to just add as well is that by definition, the J also means that you could be carrying biases. And so that makes you more judging, which in turn, again, may take you into spaces which are not necessarily present, multiple things. However, there are two things which are pretty much myths about these personality tests. One is very often I have been told by expert practitioners of these that, and this is what Jung postulated. If you read his book on personality theory or whatever that is called, where he talks about the first three attributes, extroverted versus introverted, thinking versus feeling, and intuitive versus sensory. MBTI, Myers-Briggs added the last one, judging and perceiving. It was not part of the original mix of Jungian 3 into 2. And where he says, actually, it would be dangerous for me to try and shift a person from a thinking to feeling profile or vice versa. And it almost sort of implies that might create serious traumas in the person, or the person would be in some way disabled and so on and so forth. And then I'm a fan of Jung. I wouldn't say I'm a student of Jung. Then when I looked at many of his later works, he himself has contradicted that. But if someone reads the original theory of personality, and that is what it says. And so many people who work with MBTI seem to think that it's like a part of a DNA. It is not. I used to be a high STJ, and today I'm somewhat NFP, and I have become, over a period of time, more of a borderline. Pretty much anybody who works in a hierarchical corporate kind of an environment, by the very fact that you are forced into following that system, you are likely to be a sensory thinking and a judging person, because that is what you need to be if you want to be successful in that environment, at least traditionally in that hierarchical sense. So I did my own documentation, and I have found this is verifiable from the MBTI site, that if you take a large percentage of people, you would find, forget about E and I, and if you take the other three, the combinations, the STJ would be twice the statistical average that you would expect. You have 16 personality four-letter words. So that means if you eliminate the E and I, the others should be around 12% each. But STJ, if you look at it, would be close to about 22 to 24. So there's a very high preponderance of STJs, and that is primarily because of many of the people who come and take these tests are in somewhat of a, let's say, an industrial or commercial environment or whatever that could be, and that's what it fosters. However, if you get out of it, and I've seen many people, I have measured this, I have measured it for myself, then when you get into a space like training, coaching, and these kind of things, and when you forcibly change yourself, or if you have traumas which change you, your personality profile changes. I mean, I know this is controversial. I've talked about it to some people, many people do agree, but I'm not sure whether there's any kind of great amount of research which is done on it. I don't know, Suman, if you are aware of any.
I don't know if any research on that, Ram.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So these were some of the questions. I'll come back to you next break that you have.
Yeah.
We just have about 15 or 20 minutes to go, Suman.
Yeah.
But of course, we can stay on a little longer.
Okay. So another behavioral tool, maybe some of you are also familiar with, is called the DISC profile, PPA. And there are many different versions that are available today in the market if you wish to use. It helps to get certified on this, but I've also known people being able to understand the report and use it if they're not certified. Your call. individually. What it covers is again these four, domains, if I may use the word. So it talks about my need for power, which is called dominance. So this again, if you could work with when it comes to assertiveness, being able to take charge of a given situation, how forceful I am in any given situation. So it's all about my power orientation. That's the dominance. And it also talks about compliance, which is about how important is it for me to adhere to any kind of policy, any kind of structures or systems, how process oriented I am, and so rule following essentially. So it also measures that. What it also measures is my ability to influence people, how friendly I am, how much do I reach out to people. And you will notice if many of you who are familiar with this and those of you who will want to use it, somebody who will have a very high score on dominance, you will also notice in the conversation they will just take charge of the whole conversation. So that's why it's also like a behavioral tool, because you can sort of learn and change. So I spoke about dominance, compliance, influence, and the steadiness is about the pace, which is also how firm am I going to hold myself to something. It's also the how sustainable am I when it comes to any of the situations. So if I have a very high score on any one of these, so obviously my whole personality, the way I will behave with people, will also determine which of these is high for me. And especially when you're working with leadership, these two are seen more closely, which is dominance and influence. And at least in my experience, many coaching conversations have focused on how do I either increase my score on dominance or increase my ability in dominance or decrease it a little bit, and how do I increase my influence. And there could be some people who may have just one of these elements the highest as their preference. Then it's a good conversation about how are you managing the other things. And if whatever is high, you will notice it will come across in every conversation they do, every decision they make, even the way people see them. And if you're working with senior leaders on, let's say, some strategic elements, if they're coming and asking you, how do I start looking at the big picture? How do I create a vision and things like that? Then, if you have to choose between a few of the tools, then between the DISC and the MBTI, maybe MBTI will be more useful. So you will also be able to choose and recommend the tools depending on what the objective of the coaching engagement is. So this is about DISC, and you can actually plot and see where the person falls, and accordingly maneuver that conversation with the coachee. Now,
Suman, sorry to
yeah,
butt it. Disc is by Marston, right?
yes.
Okay, I mean, just some fun facts. Marston is the guy who created the Wonder Woman,
Oh,
the comic. And he's also the guy who invented the lie detector as it's known today. And he was an FBI investigator. And his passion was about understanding people. So he wrote a book, which is fantastic, actually,
yeah.
very interesting to read. And he was the first person who introduced this concept of picking up adjectives, and based on the adjectives that you pick, DISC works on that basis. Several others work on that way, rather than asking you situational questions.
Yeah. If anyone wants to use DISC, again, it's a paid report, so you will have to find out who actually offers these reports, and then you can buy. They also have individual profiles. They have team profiles. Many of these people who are into in this space of assessments, they are today able to offer multiple reports based on what you want from them. So if you're doing systemic coaching, one of Ram's favorite subjects, DISC also provides an organization-wide report as well. So this is about DISC. Social styles is another Very simple, off the shelf, no certification required. You can, and there is no individual based reports that you get. There is just information about what these 4 styles are, and there is a very simple test that you can take, and you understand how do you. This is again a behavioral tool. So it says there are 4 different kinds of styles that we use. These are social styles, which is about how do we relate with people. So we could be the driving kind, who are extremely result oriented. We could be the analytical, who is constantly looking at what is to be right, and the amiable people who need to feel safe, and hence they are usually very laid back and docile, not really expressing what they want to say, etc. And then you have the expressive, of course, who ensure that they're saying the things which will get the approval from the others. Okay, so there are these 4 social styles, and this is again, like I said, it's a free test. Anybody who's interested, you could just let us know. I'll be happy to send you the test along with the report, and you can use it. You don't even need too much of analysis and too much of depth that you need to go to. It's a simple tool. Okay. I've also converted this into the other language, Hindi, for some of my clients, and it's beautiful. Um, so moving ahead, these are more like, the elements that we want to study at the core of our personality. So these also measure personality. Hogan is today one of the most um, used assessments when it comes to coaching and leadership development, etc. And they have a variety of reports that they can generate, and so I've just listed them here. What is also important here is many other tools talk about the individual and what their strengths and limitations are, etc. Hogan also have a report for the derailers. It sort of measures. The report that I have used had like 12 derailers, and you actually get a score on each of those, saying which one is your highest and what do you need to focus on. And in leadership, what happens is strengths is something many of us speak about, and somewhere associated we also speak about weaknesses, which I call limitations. But the derailers are mostly when I'm mindless about my strengths, I'm not using it appropriately, it can just become a derailer. So this is a very, very very good tool, very good report actually. So that's one report they have. And the MBPI is also, if you are getting to work with a leader for a long-term engagement and they're looking at deeper shifts, the motives, values, preferences, inventory can be very, very useful, because you can just keep building on beliefs and values and so many things you could work with if you're using this report. There is also a report for leaders, which is for reasoning style. How do you make decisions? How do you analyze? Personally, I haven't used this much. I don't know, Ram, if you have any further idea to this.
Sorry, what was that?
The HBRI, the Hogan Business Reasoning Inventory.
No. I haven't used it at all. I stick to just HPI, HDS, and MBPI.
Yeah. And they have the judgment reports, which actually puts all of this together. So if you want to do like a holistic approach to using Hogan, you can get it all together in one report, which they call the judgment assessment. So this is...
Suman, just to, now that you asked me this question, I started using Hogan, Harrison, Luminger, Conferry, all these things, because organizations came up and said, this is what we apply. And I told them very clearly, look, this was some years ago, that I was not certified in any of them. I currently am certified in Hogan and Harrison both. But I was able to reasonably well use it for the purposes that even today, after having gone through the certification, I do. This is really where it's important to understand that these assessments are really really for the benefit of the client, for the client to agree. If at that point in time, the client turns around and says, this is not me, I as a coach would listen to the client more than the test, and then try and figure out what is it that happened. Whether it was the client's mood at that point in time, it was an independent sort of individual test, or when it was being perceived by a number of people, were there other biases that were coming in establishing them. Having said that, I find that in most of these tests, Hogan, Harrison, etc., there are certain elements, like for example, in Harrison, what is called the paradoxes. In Hogan, it could be called the derailer. For example, the HTS talks about the dark side or the shadow side of Jung, which is about under stress that you might be behaving in a particular manner which might not serve you. So it's good to sort of present it to the client and say, hey, this is what it says. And there are certain, I don't know which part of report is Hogan used to put in colors, the green and the red, and the dangerous ones are in the red, which are derailers and so on. Luminger used to do that. So then ask the client to talk about it, which then comes back to the very basic, which you didn't touch upon, but I'm sure you're very, very familiar, is a Johari's window, which was developed as part of OD under Kurt Lewin by the Joe and the Harry, who were part of the OD movement. And it's about the window, the facade, the blind and the dark windows. And the key that you're really looking for in many of these tests, the Harrisons and the Hogans and everybody else, is really that part of that blind window, which you do not know, but other people are able to figure out. And therefore, many of these tests have much greater validity if they are done as a 360 than individual. Again, what I'm saying is a bit controversial because assessment people do not like to be told that. Their marketing efforts are based on other stuff. But in my experience of literally thousands of people, I have found that I would much rather have a reasonable 360, which brings out that blind side of person by other people looking within and saying, hey, this is what you are, whether through an anonymous report or an individual conversation. And I do that work in team coaching using models like constellations and stuff like that. They are extraordinarily effective. And that's what these reports actually bring in. So I just leave it there. Thanks.
Yeah. Wonderful. I can see in the chat box mention of some other tools as well. So there are plenty that we can use. We've just put together a few which seem to be used most often. But it'll be great to study and see which is appropriate. Ram, there was also another question about how do you select a tool. So I just want to say that we don't select the tool as coaches. Our job is to offer to them the possibility and also tell them what each of these tools offer, and most importantly, what's the price of each of these reports, and then the organization decides which tool they want to use. The Harrison is something that I have personally not really worked with a lot, but Ram, I think you mentioned Harrison a couple of times. So would you want to share something around Harrison?
No, really, they all, Hogan, Harrison, some of the things, Suman, I'm sure many of these people here, because they are very knowledgeable about these, unlike looking at extremes, they all sort of give a range in let's say a score of 10, somewhere between 4 and 8 or whatever it is. That's a safe space to be in. If you are too low in a particular attribute, that doesn't serve you. But if you are too high as well, it doesn't serve you. So the effort is trying to sort of see where you are in the middle. That's one. And again, all of them, when they especially applied through the 360 lens, they would come back with definitions of especially the blind side and also the hidden strengths in a sense. But far more important in a coaching conversation would be really the blind side. And again, using the blind side as a helpful tool to open that window for the client to look in and see himself or herself. And that's the purpose, really, of any of these tests. That's all I would like to say. There are multiple, somebody mentioned about some LCP. I'm not familiar. I'll certainly look into it. It's a good learning for me. But in general, I mean, there are about probably half a dozen really good quality tests out there.
Yes.
And I'm sure you know my favorite, you are familiar with that too. It's a Indian origin, Ashok Malhotra's, and
Yes.
I love that.
Yes.
And I find it so beautiful in terms of diagnosis, far better than much more expensive tools like Barrett and so on. Like you said, Uday Parikh's kind of stuff. If people know how to use it, probably you don't need to use anything else. Somebody asked me, what are the tools that I really would you suggest? In fact, if you buy Uday Parikh's book, I think the entire thing is available there in that book. So Devarajan Iyer, I think, asked, what would you recommend for an ACC coach going to PCC? Buy Uday Parikh's book. It's a worthwhile investment. Probably there are many people who would happily give it away free. He's a man who defined HR in this country. People like him, Mr. Rao, and other people. So, yeah, we don't have to go outside this country to be able to
Yes.
discover them. In fact, many others outside would be, they could benefit a lot from the information available here. Thanks.
Yes, so that was the last one that I had also put up, which is the Yum for organization. So you mentioned, so excellent. So these are some of the tools. It's always good to also sort of combine a couple of them. Ram mentioned already. It's quite powerful if you can put together 2 or 3 to look at what exactly would be required by the coachee. So these are some of the tools available. Some are priced, some are paid, some are free. Use as per your coach's choice.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm laughing because Pat asked a question, do you have to be a psychometrist to be coaching around the DISC assessment? I don't even know what the heck a psychometrist means, but what does it mean? Pat, I mean, honestly, yes, if an organization, some of the organizations do demand that you need to be certified, but pretty much I would say before I got, never before, after I got certified, before I got certified, no organization ever asked me whether I was certified in a Hogan or Harrison or whatever.
Ram, now what has happened is, I'm sorry, the situation has changed a little bit because there are many certified people available in the market. So 10 years ago, it was a little different. So maybe it just helps.
Maybe it is. Maybe it does help. I don't know. From a marketing perspective, just like a coaching label also helps, it could possibly help. But from an understanding perspective, if you start using them, if you're seriously interested, you work with someone who knows, most of it you can figure out for yourself. But yes, if you select 1 or 2 of these tools, my personal favorite, again, between Hogan and Harrison, I found pretty close similarities. Many organizations are going towards them. Somebody mentioned LCP, perhaps it is. Yum is something, certainly, it's fairly low cost to train, pretty low cost to use, much lower than most others. I find it extremely useful for individual and organizations. So these are some of the options that we can use, but the idea is more to present what these are about so that you get an interest. And somebody asked about a price list comparison. No, we don't sell them, so we don't have that. You have to go to the individual sites to figure out what it is. Anuradha asked, somebody else, Priya asked. So no, I don't even know what they are now. My information would be 2-3 years old. So that's it, Suman. Any last words? And Enneagram, I love Enneagram. It's a beautiful mystery tool. So I must tell you the story, Suman. I don't know if I told you. A few years ago, I think 2 or 3 years ago, after I had known Peter Hawkins for a while, when I called him up from London, I was staying, and he said, look, I can't come, Ram. I would love to, but I was there last week. I can't come again. So would you like to come to Bath? So I said, Bath, where the hell is it? He said, it's just a 2 hours train ride. So I'll pick you up and I'll take you home. You have whatever, tea or dinner or something. And the end, he cooked me fish. I spent about 4 or 5 hours with him, dropped me back. And then he took me to his garden where he had an Enneagram garden. And he was telling me how Enneagram works and what is the mystical origins of Enneagram and so on. So I've been a great fan. I have talked to you. You've taught me quite a bit about Enneagram. I understand a bit. I never understood the complexities of how one number interacts with another, and the triangles and so on and so forth, which I understand more. Each one of them, I think, adds some value. They have added value to me. Learning comes from multiple spaces.
Yeah.
So that's all I can say. But at the same time, nothing is better than letting the client tells you based on the interpretation that you give that person. Don't tell them this is what your horoscope means. Just tell them this is what it is. It says. So what do you think? And let them come back to you and say, what is it that they think? And that is when the miracles happen. By somebody mentioned here, I think Pat or someone mentioned here, or I don't remember who it is. The point is that it's not for the coach to tell. It's not about the coach trying to lead the client, sort of force the client. It's for the client to move into that space. Yeah. Anything else, Suman?
No, I mean, it's very useful actually if you have any report that your coachee is comfortable to talk about themselves. It can be a great beginner as well for the conversation. So that's all. And
Thank
I
you very
always
much,
use it.
Suman.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ram. Thank you.
And you did offer to someone about whatever, some social styles and stuff like that.
Yes.
So I'm sure you put your mail out there. They will contact you.
Sure.
So somebody asked about a password. Like Magda said in the beginning, there isn't a password. If you attended this program, now Zoom has developed so much of intelligence artificially that it's able to locate whether you've been there through the program. If you've been there through the program, when you ask for your password, CCU, you will get your CCU. So don't worry about it. And also the recording as well as the PowerPoint that Suman presented would be uploaded. The recording on YouTube and PowerPoint probably somewhere in the website. So just let us know. Okay. Thank you. The Wheel of
You.
Life. Okay, Wheel of Life is not quite an assessment. It's something, it's a much more futuristic tool we can talk about another time.
Yeah.
It's a phenomenally powerful tool, but it's used for a slightly different purpose. Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank
And
you very
thank you,
much.
Suman, for an
Thank you, Ram.
absolutely wonderful one. And if it's demand, you come back and present to us on Enneagram and how it changed your life
Right.
and many
Thank
others.
you.
Okay?
Yes.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take,
Bye-bye.
take
Take
care.
care.
Bye-bye.